Distinguished guests, dear members, dear participants, I have the honor of welcoming you to our side event, Violence Against Women in the Public and Private Sphere, Measures to End It, organized jointly with Switzerland on this first day of the Commission on the Status of Women. It's a real pity that we cannot be together at Outlook in New York, but this is what we can do right now. And of course, I'm really delighted that so many of you joined us for this event, which is held in the framework of a joint meeting of the Parliamentary Network Women Free from Violence and the Subcommittee on Gender Equality. We joined forces with Switzerland to open a space for discussion and exchange the good practices on this topic. Our panel, composed of prominent speakers from Tunisia, Spain, Norway, France, UN Women, and the Gender Institute, will discuss the importance of data, statistics, and indicators in ending violence against women. In order to combat violence against women efficiently, we need to have data on its prevalence, and I look forward to receiving more information about the actions taken in the country. They could be an inspiration for others. Data collection is a crucial element of the fight against gender-based violence. Systematic and comprehensive data collection in this field is a precondition for efficient and effective actions. According to a survey by the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, 1 in 3 women in the European Union has experienced physical and/or sexual violence since the age of 15. Without data, it is impossible to know the scale of violence and to have an adequate response. We may wonder how data can be collected. And of course, why is it so important? Because comprehensive data on violence against women are composed of track record on all reported cases and reports by justice, health, and social services combined with population surveys. With the network, the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, with our great chair, Petra, and the Assembly in general, we call relentlessly for the ratification and implementation of the Istanbul Convention. Its Article 11 provides that parties shall collect disaggregated, relevant statistical data on all forms of violence against women covered by the scope of this convention in order to study its roots and effects, incidences and conviction rates, as well as the efficacy of measures taken to implement the convention. To date, the Istanbul Convention has been ratified by 34 member states of the Council of Europe. The monitoring of its implementation is well on track. However, the Convention is also the subject of attack in several states, like my own Hungary. Misconceptions about the Convention and its content, as well as attacks on fundamental principles, have undoubtedly slowed down the ratification process. There are indeed many challenges in the fight against violence against women, including in the field of data collection, which we will discuss today. Thank you for. As an example, administrative data only counts experiences of women who report or seek help, meaning that only a small number of actual victims of violence against women is taken into account. Our Assembly already debated on the importance of the collection of data on violence against women, and its resolution 2101, adopted in 2016, it is stressed that violence against women could not be combated efficiently without reliable data, and call for the collection of data on the causes of violence against women, its consequences, its prevalence and frequency. It also asks member states to analyze the causes of under-reporting of violence against women and ensure that data is disaggregated as a minimum requirement by sex, age, type of violence and relationship of the perpetrator to the victim. While the calls made by the Assembly are still valid, it is, in my view, high time to discuss again the importance of data collection. Data helps lawmakers decision makers and activists to raise awareness and to take appropriate decisions. Efficient data collection can help us to step up the fight against violence against women, which is more urgent than ever at the time of pandemic we have witnessed all. Violence against women is a violation of fundamental human rights and a manifestation of the unequal power relationship between women and men and an obstacle to achieving gender equality. We need to do more to end it. The discussion during the event will feed into the work of the UN Data Forum to be hosted by our great friend Switzerland in October 2021, which will focus, among others, on gender statistics, which I already mentioned is absolutely important. You will be receiving more information about this event from Mr. Barstad. I look forward to our discussion today and thank you all full-heartedly that you are here with us. I wish you all best.
Thank you very much, Zita, also for setting the scene. I also hope that we get rid of the echo we had sometimes. I'm not so sure about it. Yes, CSW was diminished to one single day last year. And of course, also today and these weeks, we miss the energy and the atmosphere of New York, of the inspiring spirit of CSW. And of course, we miss the direct exchange among us. But nevertheless, I'm grateful to be able to meet you and to exchange here at this Kudu platform. It's also a great pleasure to organize this event with our Swiss partners, and I thank them for their hard work to making this happen. Today we will try to recreate some of the atmosphere. I only feel this one world spirit when I entered the UN headquarters in New York. We will try our best to bring it a little bit to our screens. And we have a meaningful discussion on a very important topic. There are registered participants today, more than 300 from over 70 different countries. It not only includes the members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe Equality Committee and the Parliamentary Network Women Free from Violence, but also different countries, ministries, social welfare services, non-member state parliaments of the Council of Europe, NGOs such as White Ribbon UK, Zonta International, Women Deliver, the Centre Women's Perspectives in Ukraine, Global Voices, YWCA Australia, the Egyptian Centre for Women's Rights, the Carter Centre, Association of Women with Disabilities Turkey, Soroptimist International, Girl Scouts USA, International Blue Cross, Domestic Violence Intervention Center in Austria. My special greetings to you, of course. So we also have with us on board tonight UNDP, the International Criminal Court, OECD ILO, as well as some private sector participants. So I thank you all for your really great interest and participation. And we also have a great list of speakers. I'm sure, like me, you are all very eager to hear their expertise, knowledge, and views on how data collection and research can help combating violence against women. And it's a great honor to have with us Mrs. Hanson Benzati. She is expert on gender-based violence from the Ministry of Women in Tunisia. Mrs. Hilde Barstad, State Secretary for the Minister of Justice and Public Security, Norway. Ms. Clara Brasero, Ambassador at Large for Gender Equality in Foreign Policy with the Spanish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation. You see on the screen Mr. Sylvie Theuer, Director of the Swiss Federal Office for Gender Equality. Mrs. Delphine O, Ambassador at Large and Secretary General for the Generation Equality Forum from France, the Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, Mrs. Osna Regner, and last but not least, Mrs. Christina Fabrera, Gender-Based Violence Team Leader at the European Institute of Gender Equality. Please allow me some short housekeeping remarks. We will have interpretation, provided in English and in French. Speakers are asked to encourage to keep the 4 minutes speaking time. We have set in order to have some time for discussion as well. And as your moderator, I have to be honest, I will be very strict, and I do not want to be unpolite, but I will disturb you after 4 minutes, because otherwise we cannot handle this whole panel. And on a personal and professional note, I'm really looking forward to hearing about how we can both improve data collection, and especially how we can really use our data effective to stop gender-based violence. We're already demanding disaggregated data for a century, and now at the end we will learn about how to use it and how to work with them. So I now will come to our first speaker, Mrs. Hanson Benzati from the Tunisian Ministry for Women. Please request the floor. I don't know. Yeah, now you have done. Mrs. Benzati, you have the floor, please. 4 minutes.
Merci à toutes.
Thank you very much to you all. Honourable participants, there's a dreadful echo, I'm afraid.
Do you have your language selector on the floor?
Yes.
Perhaps you could start again, please.
C'est bon?
Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Honourable participants, it's a real honour for Tunisia and a pleasure for us to be in this parallel event. The countries that are attending the 70th session of the CSW. This is, of course, being held as part of the International Day for Women. It's an opportunity for us to underline our commitment to a world based on equality and gender equality. As you know, Tunisia, since its independence, has shown a political will to promote gender equality. This has enabled us to change things from a legislative point of view and a policy planning point of view. And we've done this against an international backdrop by adopting and ratifying almost all treaties and conventions at international level, including the CEDAW Convention and the Maputo Protocol, the Lanzarote Convention as well, and also the Istanbul Convention. Since 2019, we started the process of signing up to the Istanbul Convention, and we've finalized all procedures with this in mind, and the ratification protocol has been sent to our assembly, People's Assembly. We hope that it will shortly be published. We're still a very bad echo, I'm afraid. In our combat against domestic violence and violence against women, we have a national statutory to combat violence against women. This strategy has a mainline thrust that was to collect statistical data. And in 2017, with the validation and adoption of Law 58 on violence against women, the law states how important it is to gather together data from all front line players involved in domestic violence against women. We've stepped up our work in 2019 and we adopted a strategy for developing statistics and administrative files, and we've managed to identify 38 statistics-based indicators on this matter to make it easier for us to collect data, and this should not only be limited to certain types of studies. With the adoption of this law in 2019, we've slightly altered our strategy to incorporate statistical data collection and governance and coordination between all protagonists in response to the COVID-19 outbreak and as a result of the general lockdown. The Ministry of Women and Families introduced exceptional measures to help women subject to domestic violence. We started a hotline open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, free of charge as well. This hotline was contacted by more than 12,000 people during the lockdown period, and more than 2,000 calls have been recorded. The data is disaggregated in relation to the variables, and 75% of the phone calls are related to marital violence or partner violence. We've also done what we can to provide psychological support to women and children through another hotline, and this hotline has also provided guidelines and related to the general lockdown, and there are more than 4,700 calls made to this hotline. 500 of these calls were made by children. One further minute, please. Sorry, 1 minute, then I'm done. Apart from these two hotlines, we also set up a temporary centre providing services and accommodation to Tunisian women. After the easing of lockdown, we've stepped up our decisions, and we have a national observatory on violence against women, which is up and running. And our most recent measure or decision was a joint circular between our ministry and the Ministry of Justice to enable women to access free and immediate legal aid. Of course, a whole number of other things that are in the pipeline, which will be rolled out in the near future with more decisions, and will continue to collect data and to combat violence against women. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting you, but otherwise we will run out of all our edges. Thank you for the insights to your country, and congratulations to the progress. Now to another country where the subject of gender-based violence is taken extremely serious, to Norway. I will give the floor to Mrs. Barstad, State Secretary for the Minister of Justice and Public Security. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear colleagues and friends. Thank you so much for inviting me to address this side event dedicated to a very important topic when it comes to combating violence against women and domestic violence. Accurate and comprehensive data and relevant research is of crucial importance in order to be able to target the work to prevent and combat violence. For the Norwegian government, the elimination of all forms of violence against women is a key part of our efforts to promote and defend rule of law, good governance and human rights. This is why we ratified the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence in July 2017. The Convention is a powerful tool to put violence against women and domestic violence on the agenda across Europe. In addition, it provides the state parties with tools to translate political will into practical and appropriate action. Several entities in Norway collect data that is relevant for the implementation of the Convention's Article 11. The police publish quarterly statistics that include all forms of violence and sexual abuse reported to the police. The statistical reports are made publicly available on the police website. The official crime statistics in Norway is produced annually by Statistics Norway. The National Criminal Investigation Service, Kripos, prepares statistics and analysis in a number of areas, including sexual assault, organized crime, murder and narcotics. And the reports are made publicly available on the police websites as well. Every year a report with statistics from Norway's 46 crisis centers or shelters is issued. The report gives valuable data on the victims and their children, the violence endured and the services offered by the crisis centers. In Norway, as may be the situation in several other countries, it is a challenge to collect reliable and comparable data from general support services, for example, social and health services. To challenge the problem of underreporting, the relevant services have routinely to ask questions to detect violence. As an example, Norway has introduced routine questions for detecting violence against pregnant women. When it comes to best practice in the Norwegian context, I would like to emphasize our research program on violence against women and domestic violence. From 2014 to 2019, a total of 7.34 million euros was appropriated to a 5-year research program on domestic violence under the auspices of the Norwegian Center for Violence and Traumatic Stress Studies and the Social Research Institute NOVA at Oslo Metropolitan University. The research program has been continued for a new 5-year period until 2024. This research program covers many topics. Among these are the causes, scope and consequences of violence against women and domestic violence, the work of the police and welfare services and the victims meeting with these services, and the work of non-governmental organizations in this area, and also a number of other issues are covered. We find that this research program forms a valuable basis for the further development of policy. In order to abolish violence against women and violence in close relationships, we must address the causes and implement effective measures. Research provides guidance on which tools we should use. Thank you so much for your attention.
And thank you very much for your time, discipline, and the interesting insights into Norway. Great. Our next speaker is Mrs. Clara Cabrera Brasero, Ambassador at Large for Gender Equality in Foreign Policy with the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation. She has worked extensively around the world and recently was responsible for the gender non-discrimination priority of Spanish foreign policy for cooperating Spain's women, peace and security agenda. Please, the floor is yours. You have to request the floor and then we will open. Yeah. Here you go.
No. Now you can hear me. Okay, good morning and good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting Spain to participate in this very interesting side event. I would like to greet all the panelists, but very quickly because we don't have much time. And then I would like to start, if I may, by saying that, as you know, Spain has recently declared to have a feminist foreign policy in which violence against women and girls is, of course, a priority line of action. This is also a priority priority because we understand that our foreign policy must be in line with our national policies. And as you know, Spain has developed a very strong efforts, especially since 2003, to develop data collection and instruments against violence against women. We are convinced that we now still need more and better data. And I would like to underline very briefly what we think are the main elements to have that very solid data collection that enables us to design and implement public policies and instruments that are effective in violence against women. The first of all is to have a robust normative framework. We were talking about the Istanbul Convention. Of course, this must be reflected in our national policies, national normative instruments, and of course then in our national policies. As an example, we are of course promoting the ratification of the Istanbul Convention in all our actions in our foreign policy, and because we also saw in COVID-19 how it is really important to have data collection in order to call the essential services of protection of victims. Those countries with no registers had more difficulties, of course, to call on essential services. On the other hand, I would like to underline the main elements of the Spain national system, not only in the data collection, but also in this framework. As we know, we do have a law, and we are now working on a further law that includes all the types of violence as Istanbul Convention establishes. We also have a pact of state between all the political forces in the parliament, civil society, and other actors in order to implement specific measures also regarding data collection. And we do have the government delegation for violence against women, because we think institutional framework, solid institutions are also very important in data collection. Nowadays, what we do in data collection is, first of all, we do include all types of violence, and we're going to do that in the following months, because it's true that we are missing some kinds of violence in our service. Then we also do investigations in all types of violence, so not only data collection, but also investigations. We do have the data updated monthly, and then we do have a very interesting instrument, which is the macro survey on violence against women every 4 years. And then we had, the last one was in 2019, and we are working, of course, of including all the types of violence in that macro survey. The most recent outcomes that I can share with you is that now the 016, which is the line of the helpline, assists victims of sexual violence too, and that we will have, and this is very important for us, a next survey on trafficking of women and girls. We think trafficking is going to be a very strong priority in our foreign policy, and therefore, we're also looking at national instruments in order to prevent trafficking of women and girls. We are also looking at participating in 2022 in the European Survey of violence against women. So finally, what I would like to conclude is that we, of course, need more data. Data is visibility and it's public policies. And we're also looking at how to harmonize that data collection of starting regionally. But let's see if we can do the international and global data collection together. So thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for this impressive, for the insight and these impressive activities. And also thank you for mentioning the Istanbul Convention. It needs promotion wherever possible, because women need legal protection from violence. So my thanks to you. So our next speaker is our partner at this event, Mrs. Zita Gurmai, Director of the Federal Office for Gender Equality. At the international level, she chairs the steering committee on the Equal Pay International Coalition initiative launched by ILO, UN Women and OECD. I know she is a regular participant at the UN CSW events and also works with the OECD on gender mainstreaming and governance. So Sylvie, up to you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Mesdames, Messieurs, chers délégués.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, dear delegates to the CSW. To begin with, allow me to thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for accepting the invitation of the PACE of the Council of Europe. Switzerland acceded in 2018 to the Istanbul Convention. Data collection, scientific research are key elements of the implementation of this convention for a number of years now. The law enforcement statistics provide us with detailed information and data. For some years, thanks to these annual statistical data, we know that, for example, in 2019 in Switzerland, 14 women died following incidents of domestic violence. Some countries will feel that is a very low number. But we have a zero tolerance policy with regards to violence against women and against domestic violence. That's one thing. The other thing is that this means that domestic violence in Switzerland represents one homicide out of every 2 homicides. We also know through these statistics that the great majority of the perpetrators of these crimes are men. Many of them are repeat offenders. Aware of this information, Switzerland recently adopted a number of amendments to its criminal code and to its civil code. Specifically, the time within which you can suspend criminal proceedings has been changed. There is an obligation for perpetrators to follow social and educative programs to put an end to their violence, or electronic surveillance means imposed to these perpetrators. Another investigation led by the Swiss authorities on security indicates that the reporting rate in cases of domestic violence is of only 20%. The Swiss government has therefore strengthened its policy of informing the general population. In 2020, at national level, there has been a major advertisement campaign in 13 languages, and 2 campaigns were launched on the social media, which made it possible to target 2.3 million individuals, amongst which 600,000 young people, so that they may hear this key message that domestic violence will not be tolerated, and that help is available, including during a pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our duty, everybody's duty to prevent, to prosecute, and to punish all forms of violence against women. It has been said before, but I will repeat it. We have policies based on facts and scientific research. To achieve that particular goal, we need to give our statistical offices and our gender departments and offices the sufficient resources so that they may be in a position to carry out the necessary research and implement effective measures. With regards to the issue of resources, allow me to give you one figure: 164 million Swiss francs. According to a very conservative estimate, this is the annual cost of violence between intimate partners in Switzerland. By investing in data collection, in preventive measures, we can, on the medium and long term, huge savings. But more importantly, we will prevent a number of situations where suffering is intense. I'm thinking of adults, but also young people and children. Every year, some 27,000 people suffer from such situations. For all these reasons, Switzerland will welcome the 8th World Data Forum on disaggregated data and the 3rd UN World Forum Data 2 International Conference, which will be held in Bern during the fall of 2021, as was indicated by Mrs. Gurmai during her introductory remarks. And I would invite you all to these 2 major events. Thank you for your attention.
We will try to attend in any case. Thank you very much for this intervention, Mrs. Dürer. And now we'll see a video from Mrs. Asna Regner, who is Assistant General Secretary and Deputy Executive Director of UN Women for Normative Support, UN System Coordination and Program Results. From 2014, she was Minister for Children, the Elderly and Gender Equality of Sweden, where her focus was on concrete results in Swedish gender equality policies and working towards prevention of violence, as well as on the involvement of men and boys. So I hope we see the video now.
Excellencies, fellow panelists, friends. I would like to thank the Government of Switzerland, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and the PACE Parliamentary Network for organizing this event. Recently released data from before the pandemic is alarming. 1 in 3 women, or nearly 740 million globally, are subjected to physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner or sexual violence from a non-partner, a number that has remained largely unchanged over the past decade. COVID-19 has triggered a shadow pandemic the last year of violence against women, and particularly domestic violence, which has intensified around the world. As security, health, and economic hardship have created tensions accentuated by the confines of the lockdowns, women and girls' exposure to violence from men in private and public spaces has also heightened. It is often hard to know what happens behind closed doors, but what we do know is that emergency calls have increased drastically since the lockdown in most countries. Data holds the key to better understanding the scale of violence against women and girls, largely by men. With this data, we can design evidence-based policies and programs which respond to women's needs, reduce risk, and mitigate adverse effects during and after the pandemic. In Albania and Morocco, where UN Women supported violence against women data collection, governments and civil society organizations use this data to inform policies and advocacy and improve service delivery to address the COVID-19 pandemic. In Georgia, a violence against women study ushered in the country's first sexual harassment law. These best practices demonstrate that data must be central in our fight to end violence against women. However, there remains a significant gap in the availability of quality data on violence against women. When collecting data in times of crisis, we must ensure that the lives of women and girls are not put at greater risk. UN Women has led several initiatives to ensure decision makers are equipped with timely data. Together with WHO, we recently launched the latest global estimates on the prevalence of violence against women. Through joint efforts of the Women Count program and the Joint Program on Violence Against Women Data, we also initiated a new project that will fill these critical data gaps in the context of COVID-19, the key findings of which will be revealed at the Generation Equality Forum. The need to invest in more and better data to understand the impact of violence against women and girls is now greater than ever. Behind the data are the stories and the realities of women and girls who experience violence across the globe, and also information about the perpetrators, the men they live with. And it's our duty to ensure that women's and girls' voices are heard and that we actually do something about the problem. The Generation Equality Forum and the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence will provide a space for world leaders to demonstrate that their commitments and policy solutions are data-driven and rooted in evidence in order to end gender-based violence. We are all accountable to translate this data into concrete actions. We open the 65th session of the Commission on the Status of Women today. This is a good opportunity to have these discussions. Thank you so much for having me in your event.
Yeah, it's now a pleasure for me to give the floor to another of our partners, Mrs. Delphine O from France. Our committee had already the pleasure of exchanging with Mrs. O, and we will do so again soon, as the Assembly is planning to participate in the UN's Gender Equality Forum hosted by Mexico and France, which we are very much looking forward to. Mrs. O, you have the floor to tell us more about French policies on preventing gender-based violence, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la...
Thank you ever so much, Madam Rapporteur, Madam Deputy Minister. Good afternoon to you. I'd like to thank you, first of all, very much indeed for inviting me to attend this meeting. The invitation was sent by the Parliamentary Assembly and the Swiss delegation in the context of the Commission on the Status of Women, which is starting today, the recent International Day Against Women, and the WHO published with UN Women the results of a international study which demonstrate that 1 in every 3 women have been subject to violence or sexual violence or will be. As you know, this is the raison d'etre of this particular webinar at the moment. One of the violations of human rights, which is the most widespread, and that we haven't, in fact, managed to come up with a proper, satisfactory solution to, is a subject we're discussing today. In the context of gender-based violence, improving data collection methods, of course, it is of paramount importance, not only for designing our public policies, but also when it comes to ensuring that sharing data with regard to this violation, these violations can be carried out on a proper basis. This is one of the main cornerstones of this Spotlight initiative, which is being conducted by the UN CSW, supported strongly by France. One of the aims is to make full use of the potential of this to put a stop to gender-based violence. I'd like to talk to you more today about how data is collected in the context of the General Equality Forum. As you were saying, Madam Rapporteur, we've already discussed on a number of occasions, in fact, with the Parliamentary Assembly and the Council of Europe on what can be done to join us in this forum. Now, stamping out gender-based violence is one of the priority aims of the Equality Forum, and it's an honor for me to host this with Mexico and on behalf of France. This forum will first of all be held in Mexico at the end of this month, and then in Paris virtually in the 30th of June. There are 6 action coalitions which have been set up by the forum. There are 6 priority objectives. I'd like to point out that data collection, robust data collection, is a cross-cutting action which concerns all measures which will be decided by the coalition protagonists. So any action that's decided by any coalition will have to draw on solid and robust data, and at the same time it will have to promote data collection and research to make headway on this field. One of these 6 action coalitions is dedicated to gender-based violence, and there will be member states of the Council of Europe attending this coalition, other countries such as Uruguay and Kenya, and of course UN Women and representatives from civil society. 4 main areas of action have already been pinpointed by the coalition champions. The first one is related to public policies and resources dedicated to stamping out violence. The second area is moving prevention programs to a larger scale. The third one is related to services that can be provided to survivors and victims of violence. And the last one is what can be done on the front line by civil society organizations through training. We've also unveiled with UN Women last week that it's possible for other organizations, for instance, states or regional organizations, international organizations, civil society organizations and businesses to join these coalitions by making individual and annual commitments. They'll be called these sort of commitment makers. This possibility of joining these coalitions will be open as of the 30th of March. We've had a number of discussions with the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and the Council of Europe itself, and we are fully aware of its commitment to stamp up all forms of violence. I'm thinking in particular of the Istanbul Convention. You mentioned it as well. It's ever so important to continue to remind people of the existence of this convention and to promote it. As you know, France is there to help the Council of Europe promote this convention. I'd like to congratulate, in fact, my Tunisian colleague for Tunisia's joining of the Istanbul Convention. France has been committed ever since it had the chairmanship of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe to promote the convention and the Istanbul Convention. And Tunisia is a great example of a new country joining it. So I'd like to reissue this call to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe to be a commitment maker and to join the action coalition dedicated to stamping out gender-based violence, which it can bring us the benefit of its expertise in this field, and where it can help us with regard to data collection through the 47 member states of the Council of Europe and the Parliamentary Assembly. I'm therefore delighted to be with you here today to talk to you about this. I'd like to thank you very much indeed for your invitation. I'd like to invite you to follow the Forum Festival in Mexico and then in Paris. These will be, of course, virtual events, as you can well imagine, in Paris on the 30th of June and in July. And I'm delighted to continue to discuss with the Parliamentary Assembly the work that's been started with its President and to call on the Parliamentary Assembly to join our action coalition to eliminate gender-based violence and to continue discussions on data collection and research. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much also for this invitation. And we now come to the last speaker of today, today's expert witness. She works with the European Institute for Gender Equality, which, as you all know, carries out the research, produces the studies and sets the benchmarks which are useful in equality issues. Mrs. Christina Fabrera is gender-based violence team leader with the Institute, and you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much for this invitation. We are very pleased to join you in this important discussion. So, as you know, the elimination of gender-based violence and the protection of the victims is a crucial goal of the European Union and a key area of work for the European Institute for Gender Equality. A central part of EIGE's work in the area of violence against women is the collection of administrative data. So, administrative data stands at the beginning and at the end of every policy-making process. It informs policy planning, providing with knowledge of the offences, as well as monitor changes in response to new legislation and policies, changes and trends over time, and evaluates the effectiveness of the legislation and policies. We have recently seen that the increase of the number of convictions rates in Sweden due to a change of the legislation. Without having this administrative data, we will never know which is the impact of this new legislation or policies. Administrative data also helps to estimate the capacity of the violence against women response and serves to assess the service capacity and also resource allocation. EIGE started working on administrative data in 2012, mapping and analyzing the administrative data sources, systems and methodologies for data collection on gender-based violence. Based on the analysis of the data collection process, uniform set of definitions and indicators was developed to aid the national data collection on rape, femicide and intimate partner violence. We want to help member states to meet the data collection international requirements, mainly based on the Istanbul Convention requirements and the Victims' Rights Directive requirements. Data from the police sector shows that the number of women victims of intimate partner femicide and rape is available for the majority of the member states and comparable only for 14 member states when we are talking about intimate partner femicide and 11 member states when we are talking about women reporting rape. However, data for the number of women victims of intimate partner violence varies significantly, ranging from 21 member states having data available for the number of offences, not victims, but offences on IPV, to 13 member states which has data available on economic intimate partner violence. So we can conclude that physical, sexual and psychological violence are criminalized in the majority of the member states, which is not the case with economic violence, and that there is low public awareness on economic violence as a crime or as a form of intimate partner violence. The indicators that EIGE developed for the justice sector show that much less data is available. 16 member states had no data available for the protection orders or the number of perpetrators sentenced for intimate partner violence against women, and 21 member states had no data available on the number of the perpetrators held in prison for intimate partner violence against women. While some progress has been made in the collection of administrative data on violence against women, significant gaps and challenges remain. The need for better data collection related to violence against women has been recognized by the Council of Europe, by the UN, and by the European Union in their commitment to eradicate violence against women. To this end, common standards of data collection practices are needed. We need to support the standardization of definitions and concepts. We need to agree on the use of the same response categories for variables to describe violence against women and to establish a consistent understanding of how these variables are defined. Unless and until intimate partner violence against women becomes harmonized at EU level, inconsistencies in the data are likely to result. But moreover, the statistical information regarding violence against women needs to be available and explained to help policymakers develop strategies to address violence against women and assess its effectiveness, which requires building capacity in statistical coordination and literacy. It also requires creating synergies between sectors in order to help to strengthen the data sharing, to improve the case management and the risk management, and it also requires the involvement of the civil society. So thank you very much again for this invitation.
Thank you. Thank all of you for your really valuable inputs and interesting insights. We really very much appreciate that. Originally, it was planned that I now give the floor to some of the participants to ask questions, but there have been many questions in the chat. I will try to summarize. I cannot read out all of them. It would take too much time, and we have about 15 minutes left for questions and answers. So the questions are: how can data be used to tackle violence against sex-selective abortions, violence against women, including also towards transgender women and non-binary people, and also to include those, of course. How to deal with when violence is state-sponsored, like in Iran, where it's a really systematic violence against women and men, but especially women on different levels. What challenges are there in collecting data, and does data really properly describe the situation, and how is the same thing in the digital world? How can we mitigate violence there with respective data? What to do with Myanmar, where the military expresses extreme violence against peaceful people demonstrating in the streets. And there was also the question for best practice stories of use of data against violence against women, where it is especially deep-rooted. And then there were some comments that, for instance, alcohol and substance misuse is something that fuels violence, and that it's really high time that we also follow and implement all these commitments we have made 10 years ago or even longer. Sorry for being that that's minimalistic, and may I ask those of the panelists who would like to refer on that to ask for the floor and to have not more than 2 minutes. And I'm sorry, I cannot take any additional interventions from the audience. So Mrs. Dürer, I see you are here already. You do not have to take the floor. Maybe you would like to come back to one of the questions or another one as well.
Très bien, tout d'abord.
Yes, so first of all, thank you ever so much to all our panelists. Thank you to all of them for giving us so much information, giving us so much sort of pointers for what can be done to improve the situation. I think anyone who's been attending this will have been inspired. Thank you to all the participants asking questions in the chat box. They're very good questions indeed. It'll be difficult to answer them all. But to answer the transgender non-binary question, well, it's certainly true to say that this is an issue which concerns Switzerland as well. It's a very tricky problem to deal with because we're talking about data that's very sensitive indeed. It's not always easy to get hold of information on these particular questions, and sometimes we have statistics related issues. In other words, we want to have data that is meaningful enough for us to be able to process it. Another issue that's mentioned is sort of the fact that there are very high figures with regard to domestic violence. It's sort of a real black mark, and what we hear is that only 20% of cases of domestic violence are reported to the police. We want to encourage victims to report such incidents to the police. Now, with regard to the issue of substance alcohol abuse, it's certainly true to say that studies have indeed shown that alcohol is a very significant risk factor when it comes to an individual committing violence. Doesn't mean that if an individual consumes a lot of alcohol, then they're going to be violent individuals, but it's certainly there's a tendency for violent individuals to have perhaps an alcohol problem or other related issues, and certainly anyone dealing with issues concerning the misuse of substances and alcohol need to be trained to be able to address the issue of violence as well. That's what I wanted to say by way of reply.
Thanks a lot. Would anybody else from the panel take the floor? Meanwhile, I maybe can answer the question on Myanmar. Just from my example, we will have a committee for foreign affairs tomorrow where not only me, we have 3 different motions on how to deal with that, and hopefully we will decide on a motion where we really call on the one hand for sanctions and also to accept or to officially accept as a partner the elected MPs and foster their struggle against the military regime. But besides economic sanctions, I think at the moment there is not a lot to do for us, as it's not very likely that the Security Council will take any decision because of some very close partners of the 5 veto mites. So Hilde Barstad is also took the floor and wants to intervene. Thank you.
Challenges connected to this issue, and I guess we all can agree upon that we are facing many challenges associated with obtaining adequate data in this area, and especially the dark figures. Despite that we have dedicated efforts over many years, I think we must acknowledge that violence against women and domestic violence often is very invisible to the public. Many victims of violence lack the necessary confidence that the police or the support services can help. Guilt, shame and anxiety about what happens after a possible report to the police puts an effective stop to coming forward. Measures to uncover the violence and measures to remove the taboos is therefore of great importance to get an overview of the actual extent of the violence in our societies. And I also would like to add that we in Norwegian context see the need for more gender-segregated statistics for different instances of violence. In addition, we need better data on the situation for women with disabilities. They are more often the victims of sexual violence, intimate violence and physical violence than the general population. And finally, I would like to emphasize the importance of good research. Our policy in this area must be knowledge-based, otherwise we will not achieve the goal of a society free of violence against women. And in just a short time, we are about to launch a new action plan in this area. And connected to this work, we have had a number of meetings with different organizations, activist groups and institutions, and they all voice a need for more knowledge and research. So I think we all need to keep up the good work we are all doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Somebody has to mute his or her mic. Yeah, thank you. Now it sounds better now. Mrs. Fabrera, over to you.
No, I just want to support what my previous speaker was saying, that we need also research data. We know that administrative data can only show like a capture like a very few proportion yes, that we need administrative data can also show the women or the victims that come into contact with the services, mainly with the police, who reported, who agreed on having this information registered and has this information recorded, that it's not always the same. So when we want to have like a more in-depth information, and that goes beyond only the sex disaggregation data and the relationship disaggregation data by victim and perpetrator, I think that we need to go to by the moment now, we need to go to other type of data, mainly research data, as she was mentioning, and also prevalence data. So I think that we have to advocate for having more these surveys that include more information regarding the causes and consequences of violence to different groups of women and other vulnerable groups, but also we need to focus on the research. So it's very difficult to have comparable data. Thinking only on administrative data, we have seen that member states don't have the same conceptualization of what is the relationship, intimate partner relationship. Does it include women and men that are living apart together? They are only the ones that are married. So there are so many difficulties on having the same approach and the same understanding, that if we are now including more and more variables, data will never be comparable. So I would also advocate for having more research, and then that to keep moving forward with more quality administrative data. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And Mrs. Brasero also asked for the floor, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Very briefly, and picking up on what the former speaker said, what we find is also a very important challenge is coordination. As we said, we do have a very important institutional framework and normative framework, but then we have solid institutions collecting data. And the former speaker was talking about administrative data, but we also need on-the-ground data from other institutions, such as, of course, police, but also the judges or the demands, the plaintiffs that are presented. So what we saw is that to have a real and global collection of data, we do need to have very strong coordination mechanisms within the administrations and within the associations that work on the ground assisting victims. So that I think that's a challenge both nationally but also globally. And what we have done is, of course, to coordinate with the Institution of National Statistics, which is, of course, the head of that. But having a delegation of the government against violence against women is also a very strong coordination mechanism. So we would enhance also other countries and regional organizations to think about the possibility of having those kind of mechanisms. And finally, what we were also seeing is that, and I'm not answering, but picking up on the question regarding Myanmar, it's also very important for us internationally to mainstream gender-based violence, but very importantly, gender-based violence collection of data in all the international initiatives. So that is why we need it not only in the instruments or initiatives regarding gender-based violence, but also thematic and country-wise initiatives that are dealing with violence in different countries or violence in different sectors. And so we need to introduce the need to have data on that violence anywhere and in any other topics. And we think that's a very strong effort that we have to do together. So thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you very much. And I think the last one who is able to answer, to reflect, is Mrs. Penzarti. Please, the floor is yours.
Si, je rejoins les...
Thank you. I'd like to endorse what was said by the previous speakers. And what I would add is that we need to have a common understanding among all the protagonists in the sector. Of course, if we want to develop indicators, if we don't understand them in the same way, then data collection will not be able to be as effective and efficient as we want it to be. I can also go along with one idea, is that statistics based on administrative files are important, but this should of course, not rule out the importance of studies and research. Both sources of information can complement each other so that we can have an overall idea of the an overview of the size and scale of this phenomenon, and will help us come up with efficient solutions to counter it. Now, there is an initiative that we've developed to come up with a joint national methodology with regard to violence. So we started off talking about economic violence, but we want to have a more appropriate way of being able to identify the different stages that enable us to assess all forms of economic violence. Now, this can concern all other types of violence that women and children may be victims of. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And I think Mrs. Ture asked for 1 more minute. Do I see it right? Yeah.
Oui, absolument. Merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for giving me the floor one last time. I wanted to come back to one point that's been raised, in fact, by one participant. That is the whole issue of stalking. Now, it's a very important issue, this, because it is related to women's participation in their public life and their full and effective participation in this. This is one of the topics of the CSW. Now, research has been carried out on this, and it resulted in one finding that 1 out of every 6 women, as opposed to 1 out of 20 men, is a victim of stalking at least once in their lives. And this same study also revealed that public personalities, in particular women who have public responsibilities, are far more exposed to this risk. That's risk of being victim of stalkers. This is a reason why our Parliament has been looking at this issue and looking at criminalising stalking. It's a very important matter because it's something that's becoming more and more widespread, in particular with regard to what we call cyber stalking or cyber bullying, and this is something that's becoming more and more widespread.
Thank you all very much. There were some more questions and some more comments. I invite Rosa Loga to send the big 5. She mentioned the big 5 important disaggregated data. A link, send it to me. I will share it with the Secretariat. Then there was the question on data on costs, which was mentioned a little bit by Mrs. Dürer, but maybe somebody can share some more detailed information on that. And there was the demand to prioritize, to act against sex-selective abortions. I'm sorry that it was at the very end such a rush, but it's very typical for CSW. It's always a rush, and we always ran out of time at all side events I ever attended. Our Secretariat of the Council of Euro will come back to all the questions that were raised in writing to all of those who shared their email address when registering for this event, and we will give a common Council of Europe reply, and we also can include, for instance, the big 5 of Rosa and other things in that. And now I have the pleasure to give the last word to Mrs. Germany, who will try to summarize the whole event, which is not an easy task. So, Tina, the floor is yours.
We can't
Tina,
hear
we
you.
can't hear you. We had this problem earlier today already, I remember. Last time you plugged out.
Out now? Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to all excellent panelists for their enlightening and impressive presentations. Their good practices are very important to all of us, and listening to them was inspiring and really very good practices that other countries can replicate and use. I'm very pleased to cite Ms. Gurmai, our rapporteur, that 34 member states have signed and ratified the Istanbul Convention. The Assembly calls continually for the ratification and full implementation of this convention. Efficient data collection helps to set up the fight against violence against women, which is more urgent than ever in view of the consequences of the current pandemic situation. We talked about really the systematic and comprehensive data collection, which are crucial to prevent and address gender-based violence. I think all enriching experience from all these countries shows us that really the Istanbul Convention, and especially the Article 11, where it's cited, data collection and research are very important to protect and support victims and to eliminate violence against women and domestic violence as well. I think we can measure also the way the services are approaching and are responding to the women's needs, as well as I see it as a tool that can empower women as survivors. If they see that they are data, they are research, they can also be easily access other services and critical services to them. Reliable statistics on the prevalence, causes, and consequences of all types of violence against women and girls are essential to develop effective legislation, to advocate for legislation, to develop strategies and protocols, and for the implementation of this kind of legislation. Also, we heard from all panelists talked about coordination of data, and this is really very much to be effective, the policy and policy evidence, because it's also related with Article 1 of the Istanbul Convention that refers to design a comprehensive framework and the need for effectively cooperate in order to adopt an integrated approach. And we see it as very important that these data should be coordinated, that the policies and programs to address women survivors, women victims of domestic violence or gender-based violence to benefit from these services. I'm pleased to say that Mrs. Regner from UN Women mentioned also the Albanian experience, which is also a good practice. There is built a system, Revalb system, which really access online all the cases of gender-based violence or domestic violence at the local level, and also how the referral mechanisms are providing services to them. I think all this intense information of this webinar, all this information and good practices that are shared are very good tools to design better policies and to replicate our good practices in other countries. I would cite Ms. Gurmai, who said that systemic and comprehensive data are crucial to prevent and address gender-based violence. And I would probably close with the fact that Mrs. Regner mentioned. Behind the data, there are stories of these women. And for us, this is very important. For me, this is key takeaway lesson that we have to do. We need to think about stories, their life stories, and how we could be more accountable to address their needs and to provide good services to them. I would close with this because it was very short time, but excellent information, and thank you again to all panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eglantina, for making the impossible possible and sum up in less than 5 minutes. I want to thank all participants. And before I close the event, let me mention that on the one hand, you will get written answers on those questions who were not answered due to time constraints. And I really very much hope that we will have the possibility to meet in person at the next year's CSW in New York and catch up on inspiring come-togethers in exchange at coffee breaks and important talks during a walk in the blooming rose garden. It was a pleasure to meet you all. Thank you very much for your participation, for your interest, for your commitment, and for your work against the violence against women. Thanks. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.